Hello, hello. We are live today. I'm speaking with Dr. Kimberly Moore. We're going to be talking about helping our teens, especially our high school seniors, succeed with the transition out of high school into the next phase of their life, whatever that next phase is. And we're really specifically going to be talking about skills that they need, life skills that they need for different aspects of their life, be it academic, independent living, social, employability. But before we get into that, I'm going to introduce our speaker, and then we're going to acknowledge that we understand that people are in a difficult place today because of yesterday's shooting in Tennessee. So we want you to know that we're here for you for that, that you can go to our website and there are resources there for you, the yourteenmag.com website. And Kimberly may have other resources for you for that. And then we're going to get into our conversation. But first, Kimberly, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for extending the invitation. I appreciate it very much.
I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Good.
We spend a lot of time talking about college and communication. Like,
Mhm.
okay, I hear from parents all the time, I'm not sure I taught my kids the right things now that they're leaving the house.
Right. You'll
So
know 6 months after whether you did or not, because you'll get a call from me.
okay, why don't we begin with you telling us a little bit about you and your work? I
Mhm.
didn't mention that you are the Dean of Students at Miami University in Ohio, right?
I am. I'm the Associate Vice President for Student Life and the Dean of Students, kind of a dual role.
Okay.
And I've been at this university for 5 years, but I've worked at numerous universities. I have about 20 years of experience in higher education. And I have lots of degrees, but ultimately, what it boils down to is my expertise and specialty areas are students in distress, student success, what it takes for a student to start and persist through college and ultimately achieve their goals and be successful in their first destination career. And then also really about the transition to adulthood. So young people tend to be dependents. College is a time for interdependence, and then ultimately the goal is for them to be independent adults. And so it's in that transition and the developmental arc that I have some specialty. I'm
So
also a
you,
parent.
okay,
I don't know if
yes,
that
important.
qualifies me. I'm also a
Yeah.
parent of a teen and a tween. And so that intersection of my work and my motherhood gives me kind of a unique perspective I can't wait to share with you all today.
I have one thing to do before we
Yes.
move on, and that is Jessica, the amazing Jessica. Those who've watched us before know the amazing Jessica's behind the scenes, and she says you are at her alma
Yes, that's right. Here we
mater.
go. I'm representing today. That's wonderful.
So we had to get that out there.
Yes.
Yay,
Welcome home,
Jessica.
Jessica.
um, so basically, you see the results of our work, the parenting. You know if we have imparted these skills and if, or at least have tried.
Yes, yes. And actually, that is what has prompted me to want to get out in front of more parents. It's a bit of a, you know, we're at a precipice where I am trying to basically ring the bell or sound the alarm for parents to not sit in helplessness. Sometimes parenting can be so hard and difficult that whether it's my friends, my peers, my collegiate network, the parents I work with, my colleagues across different colleges and universities, we're all seeing very similar things. And it's parents' frustration, and they can't understand why their student is struggling in college or making the transition into adulthood. And there's this failure to launch epidemic that's really happening across the country. And so I wanted to go as upstream as I possibly could. And you can't get more upstream than parents and parenting. And so if I really want to sound the alarm and then help parents understand what I think in my experience and in my history here and knowledge, I want to share what I think are the foundational, most critical things to make sure your student or your young adult has developed over time to be ready to really be a successful independent adult. And that's really ultimately the goal, right? All of us want our children to ultimately be able to stand on their own 2 feet and be successful in this society. And that whether you like the systems or the structures that are happening, they exist as they're changing and evolving. And we need our students to be able to adapt and really engage in that social fabric. Our young people are so critically important to our future. It doesn't get more important than that. And so it's an incredibly important job to be a parent, and a steward and a guide, and a support system. And I think right now in our society, parents are inundated with competing priorities. And we often think about it as if, well, we got 18 years for that. Like today in this moment right now, I have a phone call to return, I have groceries to get, I have to get so and so to this practice, and I have a work, Zoom call in 30 minutes, and you've got all this incoming. And the natural sort of reaction for parents is to survive those moments. And ultimately a little bit of short-term pain there to do the right thing in the moment for your parenting and for your child, um, will pay off dividends. So it's a short run, long-term calculation that I want to empower parents to take and play the long game. Play the long game. So we'll get into all of that. But ultimately, I'm animated about this topic because I am seeing the outcomes of some inputs that are not just parents, but parents are the most influential.
Okay. I want to remind people that you can leave a question or a comment in the comment section if you're listening to us or watching us live on Tuesday, noontime Eastern, on Tuesday, March 28th. So you see the results, and as you see, it's becoming increasingly aware or almost more epidemic like that the lack of these skills of preparedness. How much of that is COVID related, and how much of that is parents becoming burdened with so much of the other stuff that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I would say, so I've got multiple generations that I've seen, right? So,
Mhm.
the millennials, the Gen Z, now even I think, what are we calling the next one? Alphas, I think they're called.
That's new for me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. We're starting the alphabet over again, I guess. But and I'm an Xer, and so I have an intergenerational perspective, and I've been doing this work across generations, and I have seen a stark change. Now, what I will say is, COVID has amplified and accelerated the fissures that we had seen prior to COVID. So there was evidence of this, what I'm calling a devolution of readiness or a devolution of preparedness, in students. There was evidence of that prior to COVID, but COVID accelerated it. And we're really not going to understand the deep effects of this for probably a 10-year span. So the younger your child was when COVID hit and remote learning and all of that sort of hit, that isolation factor, the younger your child was, the fewer long-term effects I think you're going to have. You have time to recover.
Mhm.
But those students who were starting high school at the time COVID started, I think that's probably the nexus of the most challenging to catch a student up by the time they go to college. And so that condensed time period where students lost their ability to develop their social skills because of the isolation factor, and then learning development or learning skills, time management, organization, the just demands of the academic rigor of a high school or school, teamwork. That was something that was really disrupted during COVID because students couldn't work on a project together in the same ways. They didn't co-present together. So we are seeing some deficits. This is not every student, right? Every student has its own context, sort of own mix of variables. So they might be thriving in some ways and a little bit developmentally delayed in others, or be missing some skill set or knowledge in others. But by and large, we are seeing that it's that kind of learning environment in college that students are not as ready for. So there's project-based work, the team environment, social skills, taking risks socially. Those things I think were deeply disrupted because of COVID.
Okay, so let's talk about the actual skills, the nitty-gritty that they need.
Sure.
What are the hard and maybe soft skills that our graduating seniors need to have so that they can go and succeed in the next phase of their life, be it college,
Mhm.
military exploration, or work?
So I'm going to say a word that I don't know if everybody knows, but it's like if I had to pick one thing, it's the development of self-efficacy. So that ability for a young person to believe that they have the capacity to deliver and execute behaviors that will achieve their goals, right? So that self-efficacy, the real key component of that is the students or the child's personal belief in themselves to be able to do what is necessary to achieve their goals. So there's a lot that goes into that. That's self-confidence, that's resilience, that's distress tolerance. I can go slower. Some level of risk taking. That's one of the best parts of being a youth and being young is your risk tolerance used to be an incredible characteristic of our younger generations, and it's getting actually our younger generations are far more risk averse, we're finding. But social skills, right?
Mhm.
The ability to dialogue across difference, incredibly important in the divisive landscape that we're in right now. Um, Self awareness, critically important. And then, last but not least, by any measure, are coping skills. And I think somewhere along the line, we have lost um, this we have shifted to these maladaptive coping skills. And what we are seeing by and large as a maladaptive or something that is not favorable, bad for a student is this avoidance. We're seeing avoidance when students don't want to confront something that is hard, they avoid. And wow, that is a trajectory for compounding issues for sure. So if a student can develop the distress tolerance, grit, and resilience, I think they are set up to eventually, which is the total package, which is self-efficacy. When you have all of those things I just named, you
Mhm.
ultimately have a self-efficacious student who can really be successful and thrive in this environment that assumes some level of independence. I'll
I
stop.
like the way you broke no, I like the way you broke that down. I know there are parents out there said, "I thought you were gonna tell me about cooking and shopping and stuff." But in order for them to do those things, they first have to believe that they can do it. So I like how you broke it down, belief in yourself. And in order to have belief in yourself, you have to have confidence, you have to be resilient, you have to be able to tolerate distress
Mhm.
and be willing to take risks. Of course, these are, calculated risks,
No,
not
not
life-threatening.
egregious, like, jumping out of planes. We're not talking that level of risk. Let me give you an example.
Mhm.
So, what we're seeing is that when a student transitions to college, there is, they might not know anybody. And so they really have to be vulnerable and put themselves out there in a way to meet somebody new. What the roommate situation can be built in, that can go sideways sometimes, but
Mhm.
eventually, like, you have to find your people, right? You have to find your group. It doesn't have to be a huge group, but you got to find your place. And finding place and feeling like you belong and you're included on a campus is incredibly important, right? Even maybe you don't go to college, maybe you go on to some other industry, right? Or you go to the military. Like, finding your home and your place, that post high school destination, it's critically important to feel like you belong. Well, what we're finding is that students are missing some of those social skills and that risk aptitude to be able to brave the space between not knowing someone and taking a risk to develop a relationship or meet someone new and eventually um, make some friends. So that's just one example of the risk aversion setting that we're seeing in some students is that they would much rather stay in their room. It's safer in their room watching Netflix and connecting on social media than it is to leave their residence hall room or their off-campus apartment and go into a space where they might not know somebody and make some connections. So when I talk about risk aversion, I mean, the dating life of young people is bizarre for some of these other generations, right? And it's a lot lower risk to swipe left or right than it is to be in a space, in a room, start talking to someone you don't know and making a connection live. So that's when I talk about risk aversion, I'm talking about really in the social realm.
Okay. And then socially, you said they should be able to dialogue across differences, which is important because as a greater society, we aren't doing it. We're focused in on news that tells us what we already want to hear.
Right.
Self-awareness and having coping skills so that they do not automatically default to avoiding difficult situations. So let's say we parents, we agree with all this. These are good things. We want our kids to have these things. How do we help them? How do we
Yes.
help them believe in themselves? How do we help them know that it's okay to take a risk?
So here's the key. 4 things first.
Okay.
First, as young as possible, set clear expectations. Set clear expectations. It's setting a bar, a standard of operating and behavior to function in your family. You set those expectations as early as possible, and then you hold your student to them. You hold your child to those expectations. Don't be smushy. Don't be, waffling on those expectations. An example in my house is respect of self and others is that's a minimum expectation. Do my children always meet it? Do they give me a little attitude? Do they give me a little lip? Last night, my 13-year-old and I had an exchange. It doesn't always work.
An exchange.
Right. But the reality of it is after, like, the de-escalation, it was over. She had ripped jeans that they were too high for my comfort level. And she didn't realize, because her perspective was looking down, but I was like, you will get rid of those jeans. I bought those jeans myself, Mom. They're my jeans. I'm not getting rid of them. Yes, you are. And here's why. And it's about self-respect. It started with that. And we had that whole conversation. Now, other parents might be something they're not even worried about. It's totally fine. So I'm not judging on every parent's going to have their own standard of expectations. But in my house, it is critically important for my children to represent themselves in a way that is respectful to self and others, right? So that's minimum. The other standard is, we eat together. Dinner is a family event. We're home for dinner. If it's late because we have activities, we're going to come together. So I'm just giving you examples of my personal expectations and what my children know. Honesty is an expectation. So holding them to some bar communicates the fact that I love you, I care for you. Values are a really important part of life. And you don't have to have my values, but as a child growing up, we're going to share these values, and that's going to be our anchor. And that communicates to them an environment of safety and care and love and ultimately support. So that balance of standards and support, there's so many resources out there and so much data out there that demonstrates that balance is a key to an independent adult. So first and foremost, that was the longest answer to, I'm not even done yet, but expectations is how. The next one is setting boundaries. You got to have boundaries. If you set them too far, it's going to produce anxiety in the child because they're just not prepared to have that kind of freedom, right? If you set them too narrow, where it might rain and they're in their galoshes and their raincoat and holding an umbrella because it has a 20% chance of rain, now you've got a child who's developing a little bit of mistrust in the world, and they're not developing their self-reliance and their self-confidence if you're overprotective, right? And so finding the right boundaries for a child to test. And then here's the key: fail. We want our young people to fail. I know that's wild, right? That's so wild.
It
But
hurts.
it hurts. It hurts. You want your child to experience failure. You want your child to experience disappointment. You want your child to feel embarrassed because that means they're learning. And when we come in and we cover for them in these opportunities and we absorb the embarrassment or the disappointment or the feeling of missing the mark, if we do that for them, we are literally robbing them of a developmental opportunity. And it's hard. It's the hardest thing you're going to hear me talk about today. But I'm telling you, it is impossible for a human being to go through life and not experience failure, a disappointment, because it is the absolute ingredient for growth. And that's what we want to do for these young people. We want to help them grow. And the best way to do it is not avoid or limit the opportunity for a child to fail. We want them to fail, but be there to support them through it, learn from it, reflect on it, and then help them translate it into a lesson learned for next time. And that's like building muscles. By the time they get to college or post high school life, you want them to have the right muscles, the knowledge, skills, and capacity to operate in that interdependent, independent world. So those are three. Did I get to three? I only got to
No,
two.
we
I
got
got two,
expectations and boundaries.
and then failure, being comfortable with
A
failure.
failure.
And
Yeah,
then
comfortable with failure.
responsibility. Responsibility is the other one, is you want to give your child an opportunity to be tasked with something. You support them in it, make sure that they have the skills and they can do and complete the task. But there's something called desirable difficulty. And desirable difficulty is a task that is not exactly perfectly matched with the child's skill and ability at the time, but it's just enough of a reach where they have to, it's a difficult task, but one they can complete if they try. Does that make sense? And so
Yes.
the more responsibility you give your child in that desirable difficulty range, the more confident they're becoming, because every time they are successful achieving and following through on that responsibility, again, they're building those muscles. And so that's critical, because eventually when they leave your house, they only have 3 months usually, right? If it's the normal trajectory, they have 3 months to be a high school dependent student and all of a sudden be expected to be a totally independent actor on an autonomous college campus. And you got to start planting these seeds early as possible, right? So responsibility is a really, really big one, because they're going to be expected to be responsible the moment they get onto campus. So I can keep going, but that's 3 or 4.
So expectations, boundaries,
Yes.
comfort with failure,
Yes.
responsibility. And with responsibility, we are going to set them up with desirable difficulty so that they know how to stretch. The whole preschool, I can do hard things.
Yes. Yes. That's right. And if you start in preschool, you're going to be in great condition by the time they're 18. But it's never too late to start any of these. And then I'll just put like a little cap on this. The last component is, unless you hold your child accountable for all of these things, none of them are going to matter and none of them are going to be valuable tools. So those are really valuable tools and critically important. But if you do not hold the line and hold your child accountable for the expectations you set, the boundaries you set, the responsibility you set, and creating, coming back and growing from failure, then you lose the value of the tools themselves. So that's another critical one. You can hold your child accountable with compassion. It is possible.
I like that, accountable with compassion. I like that.
Yep.
Earlier, you mentioned some fixed skills that I know some parents are going to love, that our teens would need for whether it's college or work. 2 of them you mentioned were time management and teamwork. Are there any others that we should be looking for and making sure that they can identify and believe that they can do if they aren't already doing?
Asking for help. Asking for help. We are seeing, I think it's as a result of social media influence. Nobody puts out in public that they're struggling. Very, very rarely.
Mhm.
It's all this curated sort of viewpoint of who I am out in the world. And I think young people carry that through and are like, oh, if I ask for help, then I'm going to be found out. I'm going to be found out that I'm struggling. And it is, I can't tell you a more important hard skill for an individual young person navigating post high school life is that ability to ask for help, because colleges across the country and a lot of industry across the country have a lot of resources to help individuals who
Mhm.
are struggling. It's it's bridging that divide and getting the individual who needs the help to be able to feel confident and safe asking for it. I'm telling you that that divide is we are seeing it left and right. So anytime I'm in front of my students and they ask me advice, I tell them ask for help. It's uncomfortable, but that goes back to that distress intolerance and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that is to be able to ask for help. So critically important in your first job, in college, whatever it is. People can't read your mind. People don't
Mhm.
know, and unless you raise your hand, you're not going to get the help you need.
Yeah. And that's a strength. It's not a weakness. Asking for
Yeah,
help is a
it,
strength.
absolutely. It
Yeah.
is. It is a tremendous strength. It's also goes back to that self-efficacy,
Mhm.
right? I believe that I can do this with the right supports. And if I don't feel like I'm really slipping here, and what I see is students who've been really successful in high school sometimes struggle in college, and it just is so um, destabilizing for them. And it's like, wait a minute, you probably had a ton of help in high school because everything is prescriptive in high school, right? It's time to fill out the survey. It's time to do this test. It's time to.
Mhm.
But 3 months later, everything is choose your own adventure, autonomous engagement. It's completely internally motivated, and it's no longer prescriptive. And so it's a little jarring for some students. And so there's tons of resources. They just need to know that they're there, and they need to ask if they don't know. And they could ask anybody, their faculty, their RA, their parents, preferably somebody on campus. Um, but they could just reach out, to the office of the dean of students. That's what we're here for. So
I love that. And I also love how the time just flies when we're having
yeah,
these good conversations. We have, I have one other thing to ask you and then a
yeah.
couple of housekeeping. But are there any resources for parents who say, this is great, this is wonderful information? Are there any resources that parents can go to help them help their young people?
Yeah, there's quite a few. What I will say, we didn't even get in really to social media. I strongly encourage folks to check out John Haidt, Haidt. He is a behavioral psychologist and specializes in young people, and he's done a meta analysis about the negative and positive impacts of social media. And his website is just, I mean, a treasure trove of information. Ultimately, everything that I've described is a conglomeration of my experiences as a parent and in higher education. And I do have this piece that I think Kamira might share, that has the nine points on there.
Mhm.
But the other thing is ultimately it's about present parenting. That's really what the crux of all of this is. And conscious parenting is a book that was written by Dr. Shafali. You're going to make me spell it, and I don't know exactly if I'll get it right. Shara Folly. So Sherafali, I think. But it's
Mhm.
easy to find. It's conscious parenting, and it really is about, as parents, how we can do some interior work and self reflection to understand what we may or may not be triggered by that takes us out of being present to our child in the moment. And then we lose those developmental opportunities. So it's a great upstream resource. John Haidt has so many wonderful resources to help you know how to engage your children around tech and social media. And then ultimately, really, there's so many books. There's a book called Grit by Duckworth is the last name. And that helps develop resilience. It teaches you how to develop grit and resilience and perseverance in young people. Um, so desirable difficulty, easy to Google. There's lots of things that are out there. I just happen to be putting it together in my experience as a parent and an educator.
Thank you. That is very helpful. The last one was Grit by Duckworthy.
Yep.
And we do have the op-ed you wrote with the 9 points. And Jessica will put that up. It'll probably come up in parts because the comment section only allows for so many words, but people can look for that there. Thank you so much for this. It was very helpful. I want to remind our guests who are watching that we are in the midst of Destination College. Speaking of post high school experiences, we are on week 4, but it is not too late to join. Each week is a different topic. Tomorrow we'll begin week 4. It is Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern time. It is not too late to register if you go to our website, and Jessica, who is very busy for us, will probably put the link here in the comment section. And if you missed the first 3 weeks, you'll get those recordings, so don't worry about that. And before we go, I want to tell you thank you. This was very helpful and
wonderful.
very well put together and easy to follow. I appreciate that.
I'm glad. Thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And I want to remind everybody that we are here for you if you need help trying to figure out how to talk to your young people about yesterday's shooting, the school shooting. There are a lot of issues and feelings that come up with that. And this is not something that they tell you in the Mommy and Me classes. So don't worry, ask for help.
That's right.
Thank you. We will see you hopefully tomorrow at Destination College. And if not then, maybe a little later in the week. Thank you for joining us.